She was about to walk out of the restaurant when a waiter's voice stopped her cold. "If I were you, I'd stay." Ava Bennett, CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company, had endured plenty of bad dates, but none had left her stranded with an unpaid bill and a room full of pitying stares. The man across from her had vanished. Her pride was shattered. And somehow, this stranger in an apron knew exactly what she needed to hear. What happened next would unravel everything she thought she knew about success, worth, and the kind of strength that really matters. Stay with me until the end of this story, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this journey reaches. The rain hammered against the tall windows of Meridian, one of Seattle's most exclusive restaurants, as Ava Bennett checked her watch for the third time in 10 minutes. 7:45. Her date was late. Again. She adjusted the collar of her silk blouse and tried to ignore the knot tightening in her stomach. This wasn't nerves. Ava Bennett didn't do nerves. She'd pitched to venture capitalists, negotiated hostile acquisitions, and stared down boardrooms full of men who thought she didn't belong. A blind date shouldn't rattle her. But it did. Because this wasn't business. This was the part of life where she kept failing, over and over, no matter how hard she tried. "Can I get you something while you wait?" A calm voice broke through her thoughts. Ava looked up to find a waiter standing beside her table. He was tall, lean, with dark hair that needed a trim, and eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-blue. He held a water pitcher with the easy grace of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, but there was something else in his expression, something attentive and genuine that most service workers had long since trained out of themselves. "Just water, thank you," Ava said, offering a polite smile. He filled her glass without a word, his movements efficient and unobtrusive. As he turned to leave, Ava's phone buzzed. She glanced down at the screen. "Running 15 minutes late. Order without me if you want." She exhaled slowly, setting the phone face down on the table. 15 minutes. On top of the 20, he was already late. She should have known better than to let her assistant set this up. "Everything all right?" the waiter asked quietly. Ava glanced up, surprised he was still there. Most servers would have disappeared the moment they finished pouring. "Fine," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Just the usual complications." Something flickered in his expression. Not pity, but understanding. He nodded once and stepped back. "Let me know if you need anything." As he walked away, Ava found herself watching him. There was something about the way he moved, controlled, deliberate, like someone who'd trained his body to obey his mind. It reminded her of her father, who'd been career military before the accident that took him too soon. She shook off the thought and returned to her phone, scrolling through emails she'd already read twice. Anything to avoid the pitying glances from the couple at the next table, who'd clearly noticed she was sitting alone. At 8:15, the front door finally swung open, and a man in an expensive suit strode in, shaking rain from his shoulders. He was handsome in a carefully manufactured way. Salon haircut, designer watch, teeth too white to be natural. He scanned the room with the confidence of someone who expected to be recognized. When his eyes landed on Ava, he didn't apologize for being late. He just smiled and headed toward her table. "Ava Bennett?" he asked, though he clearly already knew. "That's me." She stood, extending her hand. He took it, his grip just a fraction too firm. "Marcus Hendricks. Sorry about the delay. Client call ran long. You know how it is." She did know. She'd used that excuse herself more times than she cared to count. They sat, and Marcus immediately flagged down the nearest server. Not the man who'd helped Ava earlier, but a younger woman who hurried over with menus. "We'll start with the 2015 Bordeaux," Marcus said without looking at her. "And bring us the tasting menu. We're celebrating." The server nodded and disappeared. "Celebrating?" Ava asked. "Meeting you," Marcus said smoothly. "I've heard a lot about your company. Impressive growth trajectory." And there it was. The real reason he'd agreed to this date. Ava had built Clarity Tech from the ground up, turning a small software startup into a major player in data analytics. She'd done it through brutal hours, strategic risks, and an ability to see patterns others missed. She was proud of what she'd accomplished, but she was also tired of men who saw her company before they saw her. "Thank you," she said carefully. "What do you do, Marcus?" "Private equity," he said, leaning back in his chair. "We focus on tech acquisitions, mostly mid-market firms with strong fundamentals but weak leadership, companies that need guidance." The implication was clear. He was sizing her up, wondering if Clarity Tech fit that profile. Ava smiled tightly. Clarity Tech isn't for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price, Marcus said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. The wine arrived. Marcus made a show of tasting it, swirling it in his glass and nodding approvingly before the server poured for both of them. As the meal progressed, Ava's initial irritation hardened into something colder. Marcus talked about his deals, his portfolio, his vacation home in Aspen. He asked her questions, but only as setups for his own stories. When she mentioned the new AI integration her team was developing, he interrupted to explain how private equity had revolutionized the AI space. She'd met men like Marcus before. Hell, she'd dated men like Marcus before. They were drawn to successful women the way collectors were drawn to rare art, not to appreciate it, but to own it. By the time dessert arrived, Ava was calculating how quickly she could escape. "Excuse me," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. "I need to take this." He stood and walked toward the restroom without waiting for a response. Ava closed her eyes and let out a long breath. This was a mistake. She should have trusted her instincts and canceled. "How's everything going?" The same waiter from earlier appeared beside her table, his voice low and even. Ava opened her eyes and found him watching her with that same quiet attentiveness. "Honestly," she said, "it's been better." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "The salmon that bad?" Despite herself, Ava laughed. "The salmon's fine. The company, not so much." The waiter glanced toward the restroom, then back at her. Something shifted in his expression, a decision being made. "If I were you," he said quietly, "I'd stay." Ava blinked. "What?" "Just trust me on this one." He refilled her water glass, his movements unhurried. "Give it 5 more minutes." Before she could respond, he was gone, moving smoothly between tables with the same easy competence. Ava stared after him, confusion warring with curiosity. What did he mean, stay? And why did his certainty make her want to listen? She checked her watch. 8:53. 5 minutes. She could give it 5 minutes. She reached for her wine glass and took a slow sip, letting the Bordeaux warm her throat. Around her, the restaurant hummed with conversation and the gentle clink of silverware on china. Through the windows, the rain had softened to a drizzle, and the city lights blurred into watercolor streaks. 5 minutes became 10. Then 15. Ava's confusion shifted to something sharper. She pulled out her phone and texted Marcus. "Everything okay?" No response. She flagged down the young server who'd brought their wine. "Excuse me, have you seen my date? He went to take a call." The server's expression flickered with something Ava couldn't quite read. I'm not sure, ma'am. Let me check." She hurried away. A cold feeling settled in Ava's stomach. No, he wouldn't. The young server returned, her face carefully neutral. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but it appears your guest has left the restaurant." The words hit Ava like a physical blow. "Left?" she repeated, her voice unnaturally calm. "Are you sure?" The host saw him exit about 10 minutes ago. He seemed to be in a hurry. Ava's face burned. Around her, she could feel other diners' attention shifting, could see the way conversations paused and eyes darted toward her table. She'd been ditched, like a teenager at prom, like someone not worth the courtesy of a goodbye. The server shifted uncomfortably. "I'm very sorry. Can I get you anything?" "Just the check," Ava said, her voice tight. "Of course. I'll be right back." Ava sat frozen, staring at the empty chair across from her. Her phone sat silent on the table. No text, no call, no explanation. Just gone. She'd faced down boardrooms full of hostile executives. She'd weathered investor revolts and product failures and 1,000 other professional disasters. But sitting alone in this restaurant, surrounded by pitying strangers, she felt smaller than she had in years. The server returned with the check folder and set it gently on the table. Ava opened it and stopped breathing. The total was for both meals. The full tasting menu, the expensive wine, dessert, everything. Marcus had stuck her with the entire bill. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her credit card. This wasn't about the money. She could buy this restaurant 10 times over if she wanted. This was about the humiliation, The casual cruelty of a man who couldn't even be bothered to fake basic decency. She was sliding her card into the folder when a hand gently stopped her. "That won't be necessary." Ava looked up to find the waiter standing beside her table. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the shadow of exhaustion that even his calm demeanor couldn't quite hide. "I don't understand," she said. "The bill's been taken care of," he said simply. "By who?" "By the restaurant. Manager's discretion." He paused. "You shouldn't have to pay for someone else's bad behavior." Ava stared at him, something hot and painful building behind her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time someone had offered her kindness without expecting something in return. "I can pay," she said, her voice rough. "I don't need—" "I know you can," he said gently, "but you shouldn't have to. Not tonight." He pulled out the chair across from her, the one Marcus had abandoned, and sat down. The gesture was so unexpected that Ava forgot to be offended by the presumption. "I'm Ethan," he said. "Ethan Cole. And before you say anything, yes, I'm breaking about 6 different restaurant protocols right now." Despite everything, Ava felt a startled laugh escape. "I wasn't going to say that." "Good. Because I'm not great at following rules when they don't make sense." He folded his hands on the table. "I saw him leave. Watched him walk right out the front door while you were sitting here waiting. And I figured you deserved to know the truth instead of sitting here wondering." "That's why you told me to stay," Ava said slowly. "Yeah, I wanted to warn you, but—" He shrugged. "Wasn't sure you'd believe me if I just came out and said it. Figured it was better if you saw for yourself that he didn't come back." Ava studied him. There was something disarming about his directness, the way he met her eyes without flinching or calculating. "You could have just let me leave," she said. "Would have been easier." "Easier for who?" Ethan asked. "You would have gone home thinking the night was a failure because of something you did wrong. At least this way you know it was all him." The simple truth of it hit harder than Ava expected. He was right. If she'd left when she'd wanted to, she would have spent the whole night dissecting her own behavior, wondering what she'd said or done to drive Marcus away. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why'd you agree to go out with someone like that?" Ava blinked. "Like what?" "Like someone who shows up 45 minutes late and spends the whole meal talking about himself." Ethan's voice was gentle, but his words cut clean. "You didn't seem happy." "Not once." Ava opened her mouth to defend herself, then stopped. Because he was right. She hadn't been happy. She'd been going through the motions, playing a role she'd convinced herself she was supposed to want. "Honestly," she said, "I don't know anymore. I'm 33, and I've built this whole life. The company, the house, the reputation. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to build this." She gestured vaguely. "Connection, partnership, someone who sees me instead of my resume." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth," he said, "I don't know anything about your resume. But I can tell you're someone who deserves better than what you got tonight." The sincerity in his voice made Ava's throat tight. "What about you?" she asked, deflecting. "Do you always rescue stranded customers, or am I special?" "You're special," Ethan said without hesitation. Then he smiled. "But yeah, I've been known to break protocol when someone needs it." "What's your story, Ethan Cole?" Ava asked. "How does someone who reads people this well end up waiting tables?" Something flickered across his face. Not shame, but a kind of careful guardedness. "Long story," he said. "Short version. I've got a 6-year-old daughter who's the most important thing in my world. Waiting tables gives me flexible hours and lets me be there when she needs me." "You're a single dad," Ava said. "Yeah. Her mom left when Sophie was 2. Haven't heard from her since." The casual way he said it didn't hide the weight behind the words. "That must be hard," Ava said. "Some days more than others," Ethan admitted. "But Sophie's worth every sleepless night and every double shift. She's smart, funny, kind, everything I could have hoped for." The way his whole face softened when he talked about his daughter did something strange to Ava's chest. "She's lucky to have you," she said. "I'm the lucky one," Ethan said simply. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Around them, the restaurant had begun to empty, other diners paying their checks and heading out into the Seattle night. "I should go," Ava said finally. I'm sure you've got other tables to... Actually, you were my last one, Ethan said. Shift's over. I was just finishing up when I saw the whole thing go down. So you stayed late to make sure I was okay? Ava asked. Something like that. He stood and reached for the check folder. Walk you to your car? Ava hesitated. Every professional instinct told her to politely decline, to thank him and leave, to maintain the careful boundaries between their worlds. But tonight, those boundaries felt less important than the genuine kindness of someone who'd seen her at her lowest and offered dignity instead of pity. Yeah, she said. I'd like that. They walked through the restaurant together, past tables being reset for tomorrow and servers counting their tips. The hostess looked up as they passed and did a double take at seeing Ethan walking alongside a guest, but she didn't say anything. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, leaving the street slick and shining. Ava's car was parked half a block away, a sleek Mercedes that probably cost more than Ethan made in 6 months. She unlocked it, then turned to face him. Thank you for everything. You're welcome, Ethan said. And hey, for what it's worth, that guy was an idiot. Anyone who walks away from someone like you isn't worth your time. Ava smiled, feeling the weight of the evening finally start to lift. You don't even know me. I know enough, Ethan said. I know you showed up tonight hoping for something real. I know you stayed even when it was hard. And I know you didn't let what he did break you. He paused. That's not nothing. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out and his entire demeanor shifted, the calm confidence replaced by sharp concern. I'm sorry, I have to... He was already stepping away, phone pressed to his ear. Mrs. Chen, slow down. What's wrong? Ava watched as his face went pale. How high? He asked. Okay, don't move her. I'm on my way. He ended the call and looked at Ava, and she could see fear naked in his eyes. Sophie, he said shortly, my daughter. Her babysitter says she's running a fever and won't stop crying. I need to get home. Now. How far? Ava asked immediately. 20 minutes. Maybe less if... Get in. Ava unlocked the passenger door. Ethan blinked. What? Get in the car, Ava repeated. I'll drive you. It'll be faster than waiting for a ride. You don't have to... I know I don't have to, Ava said, already sliding into the driver's seat. But your daughter needs you, and I can help, so get in. For a split second, Ethan hesitated. Then he yanked open the door and climbed inside. Ava pulled into traffic, her mind already mapping the fastest route. Where am I going? Ethan rattled off an address in Greenwood, a modest neighborhood north of downtown, nothing like the high-end areas Ava usually frequented. She's never spiked a fever this high, Ethan said, his voice tight. Mrs. Chen said it hit 103 and she's complaining her head hurts. Could be nothing, could be... One thing at a time, Ava said firmly, weaving through late-night traffic. Kids get fevers. It's probably just a bug. Yeah, Ethan said, but he didn't sound convinced. They made it to Greenwood in 16 minutes. Ethan directed her to a small apartment building, older but well-maintained. Before the car fully stopped, he had his seatbelt off. Thank you, he said quickly. Thank you. Go, Ava said. He was out and running for the entrance before she could say anything else. Ava sat in her idling car, watching him disappear inside. She should leave. She'd done her good deed. There was no reason to stay. But something kept her there, engine running, watching the lit windows of the second floor. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Ava was just reaching for the gear shift when Ethan reappeared in the building's entrance. He was carrying a small figure wrapped in a blanket, Sophie, Ava realized, and looked around frantically. Without thinking, Ava got out of the car. What's wrong? She called. She needs a hospital, Ethan said, his voice cracking. Fever won't break and she's getting disoriented. My car's in the shop and the ambulance said it could be 20 minutes. Get in, Ava said for the second time that night. Ethan didn't hesitate. He climbed into the back seat with Sophie cradled against his chest, and Ava was moving before he even closed the door. Seattle Children's Hospital, he said. Take Aurora North. I know where it is, Ava said, already accelerating. In the rearview mirror, she could see Ethan holding his daughter, murmuring soft reassurances as he pressed a cool cloth to her forehead. Sophie was small for 6, with her father's dark hair and a pale, sweaty face. You're okay, sweetheart, Ethan said quietly. Daddy's got you. We're going to get you feeling better. My head hurts, Sophie whimpered. I know, baby. I know. Just hold on a little longer. Hold on. Ava's hands tightened on the wheel as she navigated through traffic, running yellows and pushing the speed limit. She'd never had children, never wanted them, or so she'd told herself. But watching Ethan in the mirror, seeing the fierce protectiveness in every line of his body, something shifted inside her. This was what real strength looked like. Not boardroom victories or balance sheets, but this. Showing up, holding on, refusing to let go, even when fear threatened to swallow you whole. They reached the hospital in 12 minutes. Ava pulled up to the emergency entrance and Ethan was out before the car fully stopped, Sophie bundled in his arms. Thank you, he called over his shoulder as he rushed toward the doors. I'll find a way to... But Ava was already out of the car, following him inside. The ER waiting room was bright and sterile, half full of tired people nursing various ailments. Ethan went straight to the check-in desk. My daughter, he said, his voice strained but controlled. 6 years old, fever of 103, complaining of severe headache. She's been disoriented for the last 20 minutes. The nurse took one look at Sophie and hit a button on her desk. Bring her back. A door buzzed open and medical staff appeared to guide Ethan through. He glanced back once, his eyes finding Ava's across the waiting room. She nodded once. I'm here. Then he was gone, and Ava was alone in the fluorescent brightness, still wearing her silk blouse and heels from a date that felt like it had happened in another lifetime. She found a chair and sat down to wait, her phone forgotten in her purse, her company and her carefully constructed life feeling very far away. And as the minutes ticked past and the ER's quiet chaos swirled around her, Ava Bennett realized something that would have seemed impossible 6 hours ago. This, sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair waiting for news about a little girl she'd never met, worrying about a man she barely knew, this felt more real, more right, than anything she'd done in months, maybe years. The automatic doors slid open, admitting a burst of cool night air, and Ava pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't going anywhere. 47 minutes crawled past before Ethan finally emerged through the double doors, his face drawn, but less panicked than when he'd disappeared. Ava stood immediately. How is she? They're keeping her overnight for observation, Ethan said, running a hand through his hair. It's a viral infection, not meningitis, thank heaven. But they want to make sure the fever breaks and stays down. She's sleeping now. They gave her something for the pain. The relief that washed over Ava was surprisingly intense. Can I see her? Ethan blinked, clearly not expecting the question. You want to see her? If that's okay, Ava said. I just want to know she's all right. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a wall coming down, a door opening. Yeah, come on. They walked through the pediatric ward together, past rooms where tired parents kept vigil beside small beds. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and that peculiar hospital stillness that existed even in the middle of chaos. Sophie's room was at the end of the corridor. Inside, the little girl lay curled on her side under a thin white blanket, an IV line running into her small hand. Her dark hair was damp with sweat, and her face was flushed, but her breathing was steady and even. Ava stood in the doorway, something catching in her chest at the sight of her. She looks like you, she said quietly. Poor kid, Ethan said with a tired smile. He moved to Sophie's bedside and gently brushed the hair back from her forehead. But she's got her mother's stubborn streak, never backs down from anything. Sounds like someone else I know, Ava said. Ethan glanced back at her. You didn't have to stay. I know you've got better things to do than sit in an ER waiting room all night. Actually, Ava said, surprising herself with the honesty, I really don't. They stood in silence for a moment, watching Sophie sleep. A nurse appeared in the doorway, checking a tablet and making notes. Mr. Cole? We've got her set up in the system. Insurance information looked good, but we'll need you to sign a few more forms at the desk. I'll be right there, Ethan said. The nurse nodded and disappeared. Ethan looked torn, his gaze moving between his daughter and the hallway. I don't want to leave her alone. Go, Ava said. I'll stay with her. You sure? Positive. Take your time. Ethan hesitated one more second, then nodded. I'll be quick. He slipped out, leaving Ava alone with the sleeping child. She moved closer to the bed, careful not to disturb any of the medical equipment. Sophie's face was peaceful now, the pain medication doing its work. Ava had never been particularly maternal. She'd built her life around quarterly reports and product launches, board meetings, and investor calls. Children had always existed in a different orbit, something other people chose, other people prioritized. But standing here, watching this small person fight off an infection with nothing but her body's determination and her father's unwavering presence, Ava felt something crack open inside her, a recognition of what mattered, what was real. Sophie stirred, her eyelids fluttering. Daddy? He's right outside, Ava said softly. He'll be back in just a minute. Sophie's eyes opened fully, focusing on Ava with confusion. Who are you? I'm Ava, a friend of your dad's. We gave him a ride here. Sophie studied her with the unnerving directness that only children could pull off. You're pretty. Ava felt a surprised smile tug at her mouth. Thank you. So are you. I don't feel pretty, Sophie said, her voice small. My head hurts. I know, sweetheart, but the doctors gave you some medicine that's going to help. You just need to rest. But is Daddy okay? Sophie asked. He seems scared. He was worried about you, Ava said honestly. But he's okay now. You're going to be fine. Sophie's eyes were already drifting closed again. Okay, that's good. Daddy worries too much. That's because he loves you, Ava said, but Sophie was already asleep. Ethan returned a few minutes later, carrying 2 cups of terrible hospital coffee. He handed one to Ava. She woke up for a second, Ava said, asked if you were okay. Ethan's expression softened. That sounds like her. Always checking on everyone else. They settled into the uncomfortable vinyl chairs beside Sophie's bed, sipping coffee that tasted like cardboard and watching the monitors track her vital signs. I need to call Mrs. Chen, Ethan said. Let her know Sophie's all right. She was pretty shaken up when I left. Go ahead, Ava said. I'm not going anywhere. Ethan stepped into the hallway to make the call, and Ava found herself alone with her thoughts. She checked her phone for the first time in hours and found 17 missed messages, most from her assistant, a few from colleagues, one from her mother asking how the date went. She deleted them all without reading them. At some point during the long night, she'd crossed a threshold. The carefully constructed walls of her professional life felt distant now, less important than this sterile room and the little girl sleeping fitfully under hospital blankets. Ethan returned, sliding back into his chair. Mrs. Chen sends her apologies. I told her she has nothing to apologize for. She did everything right. How long has she been watching Sophie? Ava asked. About 2 years. She's retired, lives in the apartment below us. Refuses to take full payment, says Sophie keeps her young. Ethan's voice carried genuine affection. She's been a lifesaver. It takes a village, Ava said. Yeah. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I never expected to be doing this alone. When Sophie's mom left, I thought I could juggle everything, the career, the parenting, the whole package. Turned out I was wrong. What did you do? Ava asked. Before this, I mean. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Engineering, defense contracting mostly. I designed systems for... He stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter now. That was a different life. You walked away from it, Ava said. It wasn't a question. I didn't have a choice. The hours were insane. The travel was constant. Sophie needed stability, needed a parent who was actually present. So I left. He said it simply, without regret or self-pity. Best decision I ever made. Ava thought about her own career, the sacrifices she'd made to get where she was. Late nights, missed birthdays, relationships that withered from neglect. She'd always told herself it was worth it, that success required total dedication. But sitting here with Ethan, watching him choose his daughter over everything else, she wondered if she'd been wrong. Do you miss it? She asked. The engineering work? Sometimes, Ethan admitted. I miss solving complex problems, miss working with talented teams. But then Sophie comes home from school with a drawing she made for me, or tells me about something funny that happened at lunch, and I remember why I left. Those moments, they don't happen if I'm in another city troubleshooting a weapons system. Weapons system, Ava repeated. That's pretty specific. Ethan gave her a measured look. I was military before I went private sector. 8 years, mostly overseas. Learned how to take complicated problems and break them down into manageable pieces. He paused. Also learned that some things aren't worth the cost, no matter how good the paycheck is. The pieces were starting to come together. The controlled movements, the calm under pressure, the ability to assess situations quickly and act decisively. Ethan Cole wasn't just a waiter trying to make ends meet. He was someone who deliberately dismantled his old life to build something better. That must have taken courage, Ava said quietly. It took perspective, Ethan corrected. I watched too many guys chase the next promotion, the next deployment, the next achievement. They'd look up one day and realize they'd sacrificed everything that actually mattered. He looked at Sophie, his expression unguarded. I didn't want to be that person. They fell into comfortable silence, broken only by the steady beep of monitors and the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes in the hallway. Around 3 a.m, a doctor stopped by to check Sophie's progress. Fever's coming down, she said, reviewing the chart. That's a good sign. If she stays stable through the night, we'll probably release her tomorrow afternoon. Thank you, Ethan said, the relief evident in his voice. After the doctor left, Ethan turned to Ava. You should go home. Get some sleep. You've already done more than anyone could ask. I'm fine, Ava said, though exhaustion was starting to pull at her edges. Ava? Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. You've been amazing tonight, but you don't have to stay. I've got this. I know you do, Ava said, but I want to stay, if that's okay. Ethan studied her for a long moment. Why? It was a fair question. Why was she here, sitting in a pediatric ward at 3 a.m, keeping vigil over a child she'd just met? Because tonight was supposed to be about finding connection, Ava said slowly. And I think maybe I found it, just not in the way I expected. Something passed between them then, an understanding that didn't need words. Okay, Ethan said softly. Then stay. Dawn came slowly, turning the hospital windows from black to gray to pale gold. Sophie woke around 6, groggy but more coherent than she'd been the night before. Her fever had dropped to 99.8 and she was hungry, both signs that the worst had passed. Can I have pancakes? She asked hopefully. Hospital food first, Ethan said, but he was smiling. If the doctor says you're doing well, I'll make you pancakes when we get home. With chocolate chips? We'll see. A nurse brought a breakfast tray, bland oatmeal, apple juice, and toast. Sophie wrinkled her nose but ate it anyway, watching cartoons on the small TV mounted to the wall. Ava excused herself to the bathroom and caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked like hell, makeup smudged, hair disheveled, her silk blouse wrinkled beyond saving. She washed her face, did her best to tame her hair, and acknowledged that this was probably the least put together she'd looked in public in a decade. Strangely, she didn't care. When she returned to the room, Sophie was sitting up more fully, eyeing her with undisguised curiosity. Are you Daddy's girlfriend? She asked bluntly. Ethan nearly choked on his coffee. Sophie, we just met, Ava said, amused despite herself. Last night, actually. Sophie processed this. But you stayed all night. That's what girlfriends do. That's what friends do, Ava corrected gently. When someone needs help. Oh. Sophie seemed disappointed. Then she brightened. Do you want to be his girlfriend? Because Daddy needs one. Mrs. Chen says so. Sophie, Ethan said, his face reddening. We talked about this. My personal life is private. But Mrs. Chen says you're too lonely and you need someone nice. How about we focus on getting you better, Ethan interrupted firmly, and leave my personal life out of it. Sophie subsided, but she shot Ava a conspiratorial look that said this conversation wasn't over. The morning passed in a blur of doctor visits and observation. Sophie's fever stayed down, her energy was returning, and by noon the attending physician cleared her for discharge. Keep her hydrated, monitor her temperature, and if it spikes again, bring her back immediately, the doctor instructed. But I think the worst is behind her. Ethan's relief was palpable. Thank you. Really. They gathered Sophie's things, a stuffed bear that Mrs. Chen had brought the night before, the blanket from home, Sophie's shoes. Ava found herself helping without being asked, folding the blanket and making sure nothing was left behind. I should get going, she said as they prepared to leave. Let you two get home and rest. Wait, Ethan said. He pulled out his phone. Can I at least get your number? I owe you a proper thank you. Dinner, maybe, when Sophie's feeling better? Ava hesitated. This was the moment where she should smile, make a polite excuse, and return to her regular life. She'd played the Good Samaritan, and now it was time to go back to being CEO of Clarity Tech, with all the responsibilities and pressures that entailed. But when she looked at Ethan, really looked at him, this man who'd walked away from everything to be present for his daughter, she realized she didn't want to return to that life. Not yet. Maybe not ever in quite the same way. Yeah, she said, pulling out her own phone. I'd like that. They exchanged numbers, fingers brushing briefly as they traded devices. Sophie watched the whole exchange with poorly concealed delight. I'll call you, Ethan said. I'll answer, Ava replied. She walked them to the hospital entrance, where morning sunshine had burned off the previous night's rain. Ethan had already arranged for a rideshare, and it was pulling up to the curb. Thank you, Ethan said again, for everything. I don't know how I would have... You would have figured it out, Ava said. You always do. Sophie waved from the car window as they pulled away, and Ava stood on the sidewalk watching until they disappeared into traffic. Then she walked to her Mercedes, still parked where she'd abandoned it the night before, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. Her phone buzzed. Messages from her assistant, her COO, her head of product development, all of them needed her attention. All of them were urgent, but Ava found herself thinking about Ethan's quiet certainty, about Sophie's resilience, about the way real strength looked nothing like what she'd been chasing for the past decade. She started the engine and pointed the car toward home, but something fundamental had shifted. The world looked different now, sharper, clearer, like she'd been seen through smudged glass and someone had finally cleaned it. Her phone rang. She almost ignored it, then saw her assistant's name on the screen. Morning, Rachel, she said. Thank heaven, Rachel said. I've been trying to reach you since last night. Where have you been? Long story, Ava said. What's the crisis? The board wants an emergency meeting. The Vertex acquisition is falling apart. They're threatening to pull out entirely. Marcus Hendricks has been spreading rumors that we're financially unstable. Ava's hands tightened on the wheel. Marcus. Of course. When's the meeting? She asked. 2 hours. Can you make it? Ava glanced at the clock. She was exhausted, running on nothing but hospital coffee and adrenaline. She needed a shower, fresh clothes, at least an hour to prepare. I'll be there, she said. Thank you. I'll have everything ready. Ava ended the call and pressed harder on the accelerator. The city blurred past, familiar streets leading her back to the life she'd built brick by careful brick. But even as she planned her counterargument to Marcus's sabotage, even as she mentally rehearsed the talking points she'd need for the board, part of her mind stayed in that hospital room, stayed with the man who'd walked away from his career because his daughter needed him, stayed with the little girl who worried about her father even when she was the one who was sick. She made it home with 40 minutes to spare. The house was exactly as she'd left it, sleek, modern, perfectly decorated, and completely empty. She showered in record time, pulled on a sharp suit, and was reviewing financial projections in her car on the way to the office. By the time she walked into the Clarity Tech boardroom, she was fully in CEO mode, composed, prepared, ready for battle. The board members were already assembled, 8 faces ranging from concerned to openly hostile. Marcus had done his work well. Gentlemen, Ava said, taking her seat at the head of the table, I understand we have concerns about the Vertex acquisition. Let's address them directly. For the next 90 minutes, she systematically dismantled every rumor Marcus had spread, backed up every claim with hard data, and reminded the board exactly why they'd invested in her company in the first place. When it was over, the acquisition was back on track and the board's confidence was restored. They filed out, appeased and impressed. Ava sat alone in the empty boardroom, staring at the Seattle skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. She'd won. She'd protected her company, outmaneuvered Marcus, and proven once again that she was exactly as capable as she'd always claimed to be. So why did she feel hollow? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Just wanted to say thanks again. Sophie's fever broke completely, and she's demanding those chocolate chip pancakes. Turns out, I promised more than I can deliver, completely out of chocolate chips. Might need to improvise. Ava found herself smiling despite the exhaustion. Improvisation is underrated, she typed back. How's she feeling? Much better, watching cartoons and bossing me around. Pretty sure that means she's on the mend. That's great news. Give her my best. There was a pause, then, she wants to know if you like chocolate chip pancakes. Ava laughed aloud in the empty boardroom. Tell her I love them. Another pause. She says you should come over and help us improvise. I tried to explain that you probably have actual important things to do, but she's very persuasive when she wants to be. Ava looked around the boardroom, looked at the expensive furniture, the awards on the walls, the trappings of everything she'd worked so hard to achieve. Then she looked at her phone. What's your address? She typed. 20 minutes later, she was standing outside the same apartment building she'd driven to in a panic the night before. This time, she wasn't rushing. This time, she was choosing to be here. She climbed the stairs to the second floor and knocked on apartment 2B. Ethan opened the door, surprise and something warmer crossing his face. You actually came. I said I love chocolate chip pancakes, Ava said. That wasn't a lie. He stepped aside to let her in. The apartment was small but tidy, decorated with the practical minimalism of someone who didn't have time or money for excess. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator, and a stack of library books teetered on the coffee table. Sophie was curled on the couch under a blanket, her color much better than the night before. When she saw Ava, her face lit up. You came! Daddy said you probably wouldn't, but I knew you would. Well, Ava said, settling onto the couch beside her, I couldn't miss the great chocolate chip pancake improvisation. We're using butterscotch chips instead, Sophie announced. Daddy says it's an innovative substitution. He would say that, Ava said, grinning at Ethan. Hey, I'm an engineer, he protested. We solve problems with available resources. Former engineer, Ava corrected. Engineers never really stop being engineers, Ethan said. We just redirect the skill set. He moved into the small kitchen and started pulling out ingredients. Ava found herself drawn in, watching as he measured flour and cracked eggs with the same focused precision he'd shown handling Sophie's medical crisis. Can I help? She asked. Can you crack eggs? Ethan asked. I run a multi-million-dollar tech company. I think I can handle eggs. Tech CEOs and home cooking don't always overlap, Ethan said, but he was smiling. But sure, show me what you've got. Ava joined him in the kitchen, rolling up her sleeves. It had been years since she'd cooked anything more complicated than coffee. She'd forgotten how satisfying it was, the simple alchemy of turning ingredients into something whole. They worked together, their movements gradually synchronizing. Ethan mixed the batter while Ava prepped the griddle. Sophie provided running commentary from the couch, critiquing their technique and demanding extra butterscotch chips. You're pretty good at this, Ethan said as Ava flipped a perfect golden pancake. Beginner's luck, Ava said, but she felt absurdly pleased by the compliment. When the pancakes were ready, they gathered around the small dining table. Sophie in her pajamas, Ethan still in yesterday's clothes, Ava in her power suit with flour, somehow dusted across the sleeve. It was the most mismatched, unlikely breakfast gathering Ava had ever been part of. It was also the most genuine meal she'd had in months. These are really good, Sophie declared, syrup dripping down her chin. You should come make breakfast more often. Sophie, Ethan warned. What? I'm just saying she's good at pancakes. That's a compliment. Ava caught Ethan's eye across the table and saw him fighting back a smile. I appreciate that, Sophie, Ava said diplomatically. After breakfast, Sophie retreated back to the couch with her cartoons, and Ava helped Ethan clean up. They worked in comfortable silence, and Ava realized this was the first time in years she'd felt truly at ease. No performance, no strategy, no carefully maintained image. Just two people washing dishes while a 6-year-old sang along to cartoons in the background. I should probably go, Ava said eventually, though she was reluctant to break the spell. Yeah, Ethan said, but he didn't sound eager for her to leave either. They stood awkwardly in the small kitchen, neither quite ready to end whatever this was becoming. Thank you, Ethan said finally. For last night, for this morning, for... He gestured vaguely. All of it. Thank you for letting me be part of it, Ava said. She meant it more than he probably realized. I'm serious about that dinner, Ethan said. When things calm down. A proper thank you. I'd like that, Ava said. But Ethan, you don't owe me anything. Last night was... She paused, searching for the right words. It was exactly what I needed, even if I didn't know it. Something passed between them again, that wordless understanding that had been building since he'd first told her to stay at the restaurant. "I'll walk you out," Ethan said. At the door, Ava turned back. Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch, her small body finally catching up on the rest she'd missed. "She's special," Ava said quietly. "Yeah," Ethan said, his voice soft with love. "She really is." Ava left the apartment and walked back to her car, the morning sun warm on her face. Her phone was buzzing again with urgent messages, pulling her back into the demands of her real life. But as she drove back toward downtown Seattle, back toward board meetings and investor calls and all the responsibilities she'd built her identity around, Ava carried something new with her. The memory of butterscotch chip pancakes and a little girl's laughter and a man who'd chosen presence over prestige. And the growing certainty that maybe, just maybe, she'd been measuring success by the wrong metrics all along. The weeks that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Ava found herself texting Ethan more than she'd planned. First, just checking on Sophie's recovery, then gradually expanding into other territory. He'd send her photos of Sophie's latest art project or a particularly disastrous cooking attempt. She'd respond with dry commentary about board meetings or share articles about engineering innovations she thought he might find interesting. It was easy, comfortable, nothing like the calculated networking that usually filled her phone. 3 weeks after the hospital, Ethan finally made good on his promise of dinner. Not at Meridian, where they'd first met, but at a small Italian place in Fremont that he swore made the best carbonara in Seattle. Ava arrived first, dressed more casually than usual. Jeans, a soft sweater, minimal jewelry. She barely recognized herself. Ethan walked in 10 minutes later and she felt something flutter in her chest at the sight of him. He was wearing dark slacks and a button-down shirt, his hair freshly cut, and when he smiled at her across the restaurant, it was like the rest of the room dimmed. "You look amazing," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "So do you," Ava said, then felt herself blush at how eager she sounded. They ordered wine and fell into conversation as naturally as breathing. Ethan told her about Sophie's return to school, how she'd dramatically recounted her hospital adventure to her entire first-grade class and become a temporary celebrity. Ava shared the aftermath of the Vertex acquisition, how Marcus had tried one last sabotage attempt and failed spectacularly. "He sounds like a real piece of work," Ethan said. "That's a generous assessment," Ava replied. "Most people use stronger language." "Well, I'm trying to make a good impression," Ethan said with a grin. "Save the strong language for the second date." "Is that what this is?" Ava asked, her heart beating faster. "A date?" Ethan's expression grew serious. "I'd like it to be, if you would." "Yeah," Ava said softly. "I would." The carbonara was as good as promised, and they lingered over dessert, neither wanting the evening to end. When the check came, they argued good-naturedly about who should pay until Ethan finally relented and let Ava cover it. "Next time is on me," he insisted. "Next time," Ava repeated, liking the sound of it. He walked her to her car, and they stood in the cool evening air, the city lights reflecting off puddles from an earlier rain. "I had a really good time," Ava said. "Me too," Ethan replied. Ethan. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so gentle it made her breath catch. "Can I see you again? Soon?" "Yes," Ava said. "Definitely yes." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't want to. When his lips met hers, it was soft and careful and absolutely perfect. When they finally broke apart, Ethan was smiling. "I've been wanting to do that since the night we met." "In the hospital?" Ava asked, laughing. "No, in the restaurant, when you were trying so hard to be polite to that idiot you were stuck with." Ethan's thumb traced her cheekbone. "You had this look on your face, like you were solving a complex equation and couldn't quite get the variables to balance." "I was trying to figure out how to escape without causing a scene," Ava admitted. "See? Problem solving. Very attractive." Ava laughed and kissed him again, letting herself get lost in the moment. When she finally drove home that night, she couldn't stop smiling. Over the next month, Ava and Ethan carved out time whenever they could. Between her company demands and his work schedule, it wasn't easy, but they made it work. Coffee before his morning shift, late dinners after Sophie went to bed, stolen hours on Sunday afternoons when Mrs. Chen would watch Sophie and they could just be together. Ava found herself being pulled into Sophie's world too. She attended a school play where Sophie had 3 lines and delivered them with the gravitas of a Shakespearean actor. She helped with homework, discovering that first-grade math had gotten surprisingly complicated since her own childhood. She learned that Sophie loved dinosaurs, hated broccoli, and had very strong opinions about which cartoon characters were scientifically accurate. "You know, T-Rex couldn't actually roar like that," Sophie informed her seriously one Saturday afternoon. They were at the apartment building an elaborate dinosaur habitat out of cardboard boxes. Their vocal cords were different. They probably made more of a booming sound. "Is that right?" Ava said, carefully cutting out a window for the pterodactyl landing pad. "Daddy told me. He knows everything about dinosaurs." "Not everything," Ethan called from the kitchen where he was making lunch. "Just what I can remember from the documentaries we've watched 17,000 times." "See?" Sophie said confidentially to Ava. "He knows everything." Ava felt something warm settle in her chest. This, sitting on the floor with paint on her hands, arguing about dinosaur vocalizations with a 6-year-old while the smell of grilled cheese wafted from the kitchen, this felt more real than any board meeting or investor presentation she'd ever attended. "Can I ask you something?" Sophie said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Sure," Ava said. "Are you going to be my dad's girlfriend forever?" Ava's hand stilled on the cardboard. We haven't really talked about, because I think you should," Sophie continued matter-of-factly. "You make him smile more, and you're really good at cutting straight lines, which is important for building things." Ava laughed despite the sudden tightness in her throat. "Those are pretty compelling reasons. Plus, I like you," Sophie said. "You don't talk to me like I'm a baby, and you actually listen when I explain things." "I like you too," Ava said softly. "Very much." Sophie beamed and went back to coloring her dinosaur with intense concentration. But the question lingered in Ava's mind long after the habitat was finished, and Sophie had moved on to other activities. She and Ethan had been carefully avoiding labels, dancing around the question of what exactly they were to each other. Part of her wondered if they were both afraid of moving too fast, of wanting too much, of letting this fragile thing become something that could actually break them. That evening, after Sophie was asleep and they were sitting on the couch with glasses of wine, Ethan brought it up first. "Sophie asked me today if you were moving in," he said, amusement and nervousness mixing in his voice. Ava nearly choked on her wine. "She what?" "Apparently she's been planning where all your stuff would go, cleared out half her toy shelf for your books." "Ethan, I'm sorry. I'll talk to her." "No, don't apologize." Ethan set down his glass and turned to face her. "She's 6. She doesn't have a filter, but it made me realize we should probably talk about where this is going." Ava's heart hammered. "Okay. I like you, Ava, more than I've liked anyone in a very long time." Ethan reached for her hand. "But I've got Sophie to think about. I can't just date casually or see where things go. Whatever this is, I need to know it's real." "It is real," Ava said immediately. "At least, it is for me." "Yeah?" Ethan's voice was soft. "Yeah." Ava squeezed his hand. "I know we've only been doing this for a month, and I know it's complicated, but Ethan, I haven't felt this way about anyone before. Like I can just be myself without performing or strategizing. You and Sophie, you've both become..." She paused, searching for the right words. "You've become the best part of my days." Ethan pulled her close, kissing her with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. When they finally broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm falling for you," he said quietly. "Just so you know." "I'm falling for you too," Ava whispered back. They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other and the quiet certainty of what was building between them. But reality had a way of intruding. 2 days later, Ava's world shifted in a way she didn't see coming. She was in her office reviewing quarterly projections when Rachel knocked urgently. "We have a problem," her assistant said. "A big one." Ava looked up. "How big?" "Datacore just announced they're launching a direct competitor to our main product. They're undercutting us on price and claiming superior AI integration." Rachel's face was pale. "The market's already reacting. Stock dropped 6% in the last hour." Ava's blood ran cold. Datacore was one of the biggest players in the industry, with resources that dwarfed Clarity Tech's. If they were coming after her core business, this wasn't just competition, it was an existential threat. "Get the team together," Ava said, her mind already racing through scenarios. "Conference room 20 minutes. I want everyone from product engineering and sales." The next week was brutal. Ava threw herself into crisis mode, working 18-hour days to develop a counter strategy. They needed to innovate faster, prove their value proposition was stronger, and convince clients not to jump ship to DataCore's cheaper alternative. She barely saw Ethan. Their texts grew shorter, less frequent. When he called, she was in meetings. When she finally had a free moment, he was at work or dealing with Sophie. "I'm sorry," she told him over a late-night phone call, her voice rough with exhaustion. "This is just temporary. Once we get through this—" "Hey, I get it," Ethan said. You're fighting for your company. That's important." But Ava could hear something in his voice, not anger, but resignation. Like he'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. "I miss you," she said. "I miss you too," Ethan replied. "But Ava, don't lose yourself in this. I've watched too many people sacrifice everything for a company that won't remember them when they're gone." The words stung because they were true. Ava had seen it too. Colleagues who'd worked themselves into heart attacks, marriages that crumbled under the weight of chronic absence, children who grew up barely knowing their parents. "I won't," she promised. "Just a little longer." But a little longer turned into 2 weeks, then 3. The crisis deepened when their lead engineer quit, recruited away by DataCore with a salary Ava couldn't match. 2 major clients announced they were switching providers. The board started making noises about needing fresh leadership. Ava felt like she was drowning, and every time she tried to come up for air, another wave crashed over her. She was in her office at midnight, reviewing code for a new feature they were rushing to market, when her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Sophie's asking about you. Says you promised to come to her school concert on Friday." Ava's stomach dropped. The concert. She'd completely forgotten. "I'm so sorry," she typed back. "I don't think I can make it. We have a critical investor meeting that day." The response took a long time to come. "Understood. I'll explain to her." The simplicity of it was somehow worse than anger would have been. Ava stared at the screen, hating herself and hating the situation and hating that she couldn't figure out how to be both the CEO her company needed and the person she wanted to be for Ethan and Sophie. She worked until 3 in the morning, then slept on the couch in her office for 4 hours before starting again. Friday came too fast. The investor meeting was exactly as critical as she'd feared. 3 hours of intense questioning about Clarity Tech's viability, their competitive moat, their path to profitability in a market newly dominated by DataCore. Ava performed flawlessly, countering every concern with data and vision. By the end, she'd secured the funding they needed to stay competitive. But when she checked her phone afterward, she found a photo from Ethan. Sophie on a small stage, wearing a sparkly dress and holding a tambourine, her face bright with joy. "She was amazing," the caption read. "Sang her heart out. Wish you could have been here." Ava sat in her car in the parking garage and cried for the first time in years. That evening, she drove to Ethan's apartment unannounced. She needed to see him, to apologize in person, to somehow make this right. Mrs. Chen answered the door, her expression sympathetic. "They're not here, dear," she said gently. "Ethan took Sophie out for a celebration dinner after her big concert." "Right," Ava said, feeling hollow. "Of course, I'll call him later." She turned to leave, but Mrs. Chen's voice stopped her. "Can I tell you something?" the older woman asked. "As someone who's known Ethan for a while now?" Ava turned back. "Sure. He's a good man, one of the best I've ever known." Mrs. Chen's eyes were kind but firm. "And he's been alone for a long time, raising that little girl by himself. When you came into their lives, I saw something change in him. Hope, maybe. The idea that he could have more than just survival." Ava's throat tightened. "But here's the thing about Ethan," Mrs. Chen continued. "He won't compete with your work. He won't demand you choose. He'll just quietly step back and let you do what you need to do, even if it breaks his heart. Because he's already learned the hard way that some people can't make room for what he needs." "I don't want to step back," Ava said, her voice cracking. "I want to be here. I just don't know how to do both." "Then you need to figure it out," Mrs. Chen said gently. "Because that little girl upstairs, she's already lost one parent who chose something else over her. She doesn't need to lose another." The words hit Ava like a physical blow. She'd never thought of it that way, never considered that Sophie might see her absence as abandonment, as history repeating itself. "Thank you," Ava managed, "for being honest with me." She drove home in a daze, Mrs. Chen's words echoing in her mind. That night, she lay awake staring at her ceiling, wrestling with questions she'd been avoiding for weeks. What did she actually want? Who did she want to be? The answers used to be simple: success, achievement, recognition. Build something that mattered, leave a legacy, prove her worth. But now, those answers felt incomplete, because the moments that had made her feel most alive recently had nothing to do with quarterly earnings or market share. They were about dinosaur habitats and butterscotch chip pancakes and the way Sophie's face lit up when she solved a math problem. They were about Ethan's quiet strength and the way he saw her, not as a CEO or a success story, but just as Ava, flawed, uncertain, trying her best. Around 3 in the morning, clarity finally came. She'd been asking the wrong question. It wasn't about choosing between her company and Ethan. It was about choosing what kind of life she wanted to build and who she wanted to build it with. The next morning, Ava called an emergency meeting with her executive team. "I need to talk to you about the company's future," she said, looking around the conference table at the people she'd built Clarity Tech with, "and about mine." Her COO, David, leaned forward with concern. "Are you resigning?" "No," Ava said, "but I am restructuring. I've been operating like the company will collapse without me personally handling everything, and that's not sustainable. It's not healthy for me, and honestly, it's not healthy for the company either." She outlined a new plan: delegating more authority, building redundancy into leadership, creating systems that didn't require her constant intervention. It was terrifying to let go of control, but it was also necessary. "I built this company," Ava said, "but I can't let it consume my entire life. And if we're really as strong as we claim to be, we should be able to function without me being on call 24/7. There was silence around the table. Then David smiled. "It's about time," he said. "I've been waiting for you to realize you don't have to carry everything alone." The restructuring took weeks to implement, but gradually Ava found she could breathe again. She still worked hard, still cared deeply about Clarity Tech's success, but she wasn't sacrificing everything else on its altar. She called Ethan on a Tuesday evening. "Hey," she said when he answered. "I know I've been terrible about staying in touch. Can we talk? In person?" There was a pause. "Yeah, when?" "How about now? I could come over or we could meet somewhere." "Now's fine," Ethan said. "Sophie's with Mrs. Chen for another hour." Ava drove to his apartment with her heart in her throat. She had no idea if he'd forgive her for the weeks of absence, if he'd be willing to give her another chance. Ethan opened the door, and for a moment they just looked at each other. "Hi," Ava said. "Hi," Ethan replied. They settled on the couch, the same spot where they'd admitted they were falling for each other a month ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. "I'm sorry," Ava said, "for disappearing, for missing Sophie's concert, for making you wonder if you mattered to me." "Did I?" Ethan asked quietly. "Matter, I mean." "Yes," Ava said fiercely. "You and Sophie both. So much that it terrified me, because I didn't know how to fit you into my life without everything falling apart." "And now?" Ethan asked. "Now I've realized that the life I was protecting isn't the one I actually want." Ava reached for his hand. "I restructured my whole company leadership so I could have actual balance. I delegated responsibilities I should have handed off years ago. I'm not going to pretend work won't still be demanding sometimes, but I'm done letting it be the only thing that defines me." Ethan studied her face, searching for something. "What changed?" "Mrs. Chen told me Sophie had already lost one parent who chose something else," Ava said, her voice breaking. "And I realized I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to be someone who only showed up when it was convenient." "Ava, I love you," she said, the words tumbling out. "I know it's fast and probably crazy, but I love you, and I love Sophie, and I want to figure out how to build a life that has room for all of it, the work I care about, and the people I love, and the person I want to become." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel his heartbeat against her cheek. I love you too, he said roughly. I've been trying not to, trying to protect myself in case you decided we weren't worth the complication, but I can't help it. You're it for me, Ava. They held each other, and Ava felt something settle deep in her bones. This was right. This was real. Can I make it up to Sophie, she asked, for missing the concert? She'd like that, Ethan said, smiling. Though fair warning, she's going to extract promises of attendance at every future event for the next decade. I can live with that, Ava said. When Sophie came home an hour later and found Ava there, she launched herself into her arms with a squeal of delight. You came back, Sophie said. I told Daddy you would. He said maybe, but I knew. I'm sorry I missed your concert, Ava said, but I promise I'll be at the next one, and the one after that, for as long as you'll let me. Sophie pulled back to study her seriously. Forever? Ava looked at Ethan over Sophie's head, saw the hope and fear and love in his eyes. Yeah, she said softly, forever. Sophie took the promise of forever as literal permission to integrate Ava into every aspect of her life. Within days, Ava found herself on emergency contact lists at school, receiving copies of the weekly newsletter, and being consulted on important decisions like whether dinosaurs or unicorns should be the theme for Sophie's upcoming birthday party. Dinosaurs are more scientifically interesting, Sophie explained during a Saturday morning breakfast at Ava's house, the first time Ethan and Sophie had visited her place. But unicorns are prettier. It's a very hard choice. What if we did both? Ava suggested, flipping pancakes at her rarely used stove. Scientifically accurate dinosaurs wearing sparkly unicorn horns? Sophie's eyes went wide. That's genius, Daddy. Did you hear? Ava's a genius. I heard, Ethan said, grinning at Ava over his coffee. I'm learning she's full of innovative solutions. The ease of it still surprised Ava, how naturally they'd fallen into this rhythm. Ethan had started staying over some nights after Sophie went to sleep at Mrs. Chen's. Ava had cleared out a drawer in her dresser for his things, and he'd done the same for her at his apartment. They hadn't officially moved in together, but the lines were blurring in ways that felt right rather than rushed. What surprised her even more was how much she genuinely enjoyed the domestic aspects. Helping Sophie with homework, meal planning with Ethan, the comfortable silence of reading side by side on the couch, while Sophie played nearby. These were things she'd always dismissed as mundane, the kinds of activities that successful people outsourced. But there was nothing mundane about Sophie's delighted shriek when Ava helped her finally master long division. Nothing outsourceable about the way Ethan's hand found hers automatically while they walked through the farmer's market on Sunday mornings. The restructuring at Clarity Tech was working better than Ava had dared hope. Her team had risen to the challenge, and the company was actually performing better with distributed leadership. David had proven himself more than capable of handling day-to-day operations, freeing Ava to focus on strategy and vision, the parts of the job she actually loved. But the situation with DataCore continued to escalate. Their competing product was gaining market share, and they'd started poaching more of Clarity Tech's talent with aggressive offers. 3 months into her relationship with Ethan, Ava was in her office reviewing the latest competitive analysis when David knocked on her door. We've got a situation, he said, his expression grim. DataCore just announced a major update to their platform. They've solved the integration latency problem that's been plaguing them. Ava's stomach sank. The latency issue had been DataCore's biggest weakness, the one area where Clarity Tech maintained clear superiority. If they'd actually solved it, the competitive landscape had just shifted dramatically. How? She asked. Their architecture doesn't support the kind of optimization needed to... That's the thing, David interrupted. They completely redesigned their architecture, and according to their technical spec sheet, it looks almost identical to the approach Marcus suggested during his interview last year. Ava's blood ran cold. Marcus Hendricks. The man who'd abandoned her at the restaurant, who'd tried to sabotage the Vertex acquisition. She'd turned down his suggestion to join Clarity Tech's advisory board, and he'd been bitter about it. You think he sold them our proprietary approach? She asked. I think he definitely shared information he shouldn't have, David said carefully. Whether it rises to the level of industrial espionage is a question for the lawyers. Ava spent the next hour on the phone with Clarity Tech's legal team, reviewing non-disclosure agreements and exploring their options. The situation was murky. Marcus had never officially worked for them, so proving he'd stolen intellectual property would be difficult. But the similarities between DataCore's new architecture and ClarityTech's internal designs were too specific to be coincidental. She was still processing the implications when Ethan called. "Hey," he said. "I know you're working, but I wanted to run something by you. Sophie's school is doing a parent-child science fair in 2 weeks, and she's really excited about it. I was thinking we could help her build a volcano or something, but she's insisting on something more ambitious." "How ambitious?" Ava asked, grateful for the distraction. "She wants to build a working model of a water filtration system," Ethan said, amusement in his voice. "Because apparently you told her about ClarityTech's sustainability initiative, and now she's decided clean water is her calling." Despite the stress of the DataCore situation, Ava felt herself smile. "I may have mentioned we were exploring partnerships with environmental organizations." "Well, you created a monster. She's been researching filtration methods and drawing diagrams. I'm a little out of my depth here." "I'll help," Ava said immediately. "We can work on it together this weekend." "You sure? I know you've got a lot on your plate." "I'm sure," Ava said firmly. "This is important." Saturday morning found Ava, Ethan, and Sophie spread across Ava's dining room table with supplies for the filtration project. Sophie had sketched out an elaborate design involving sand, gravel, charcoal, and coffee filters, narrating her vision with the confidence of a seasoned engineer. "And then the clean water comes out here," she explained, pointing to her drawing. "And we can test it with this litmus paper to make sure it actually worked." "Where did you learn about litmus paper?" Ethan asked, impressed. "YouTube," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "There's videos about everything." They spent the morning building the filtration system, with Sophie directing their efforts like a tiny project manager. Ava found herself completely absorbed in the work, the problems at ClarityTech temporarily forgotten. "Okay, moment of truth," Ethan said, holding up a glass of murky water they'd mixed with dirt and food coloring. "Ready to test it?" Sophie nodded solemnly. They poured the dirty water into the top of their filtration system and watched as it slowly dripped through the layers of sand, gravel, and charcoal. The water that emerged from the bottom wasn't perfectly clear, but it was dramatically cleaner than what they'd started with. "It works!" Sophie shouted, jumping up and down. "We did it! We made dirty water clean!" "You did it," Ava corrected gently. "This was your design. We just helped build it." Sophie threw her arms around Ava's waist. "You're the best science partner ever." Over Sophie's head, Ava caught Ethan watching them with an expression that made her heart ache in the best way. This was what mattered, she thought. Not market share or competitive advantages, but moments like this. Teaching a child that she could solve real problems, that her ideas had value. After lunch, Sophie settled in to watch a movie, and Ethan pulled Ava into the kitchen. "You're really good with her," he said quietly. "Better than you give yourself credit for." "She makes it easy," Ava said. "She's an amazing kid." "She is," Ethan agreed. "But you're the one who takes her seriously, who treats her ideas like they matter. That's not something every adult does." Ava was about to respond when her phone buzzed with an urgent message from David. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop. "I'm sorry," she said. "I need to take this." "Go," Ethan said, understanding in his eyes. Ava stepped into her home office and called David back. "DataCore just filed a patent on the architecture design," he said without preamble. "They're claiming it as original work. If it goes through, we won't be able to use our own approach without licensing it from them." "That's insane," Ava said. "We developed that architecture 18 months ago. We have documentation, development logs, everything." "I know," David said. "But unless we can prove Marcus had access to that specific documentation, it's going to be hard to demonstrate they stole it. He was never an employee, never signed an NDA with access to technical specs." Ava's mind raced through the possibilities. "What about the interview? We showed him the preliminary designs during his pitch for the advisory board." "That's something," David said. "But their lawyers will argue he developed his own approach independently after seeing our general direction. It's going to come down to technical details and timeline." They talked through strategy for another 20 minutes before Ava ended the call. When she returned to the living room, Sophie was asleep on the couch, and Ethan was cleaning up the remnants of their science project. "Everything okay?" he asked, reading her expression. Work stuff, Ava said, not wanting to get into details. Nothing that can't wait until Monday. But Ethan knew her too well now. You're worried. Yeah, Ava admitted. We're facing some serious competitive challenges, and I'm not sure how to navigate them without compromising everything we've built. Want to talk about it? Ethan offered. Ava hesitated. She'd gotten used to compartmentalizing her work problems, handling them alone. But she was trying to do things differently now. A competitor is using what looks like our proprietary technology, she explained, settling onto the couch beside him. And we can't prove they stole it because the person who probably gave it to them never officially worked for us. Ethan listened carefully as she outlined the situation with Datacore and Marcus. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Can I see the technical specs? He asked. Both yours and theirs? Why? Ava asked, surprised. Just curious, Ethan said. If the architectures are really as similar as you say, there might be other ways to prove intellectual theft beyond direct documentation. Ava studied him. You said you were a defense contractor. What exactly did you do? Systems engineering, Ethan said. Designed integrated platforms for battlefield communications. Part of that involved a lot of security protocol, including how to identify when proprietary technology was being compromised. You mean like industrial espionage? Ava asked. Among other things, Ethan said carefully. Look, I know I'm a waiter now, and I'm okay with that, but I still remember how to analyze technical systems. If you want a fresh perspective, I'm happy to look at it. If not, that's fine too. Ava made a decision. Monday. Come to the office Monday and I'll show you everything. Monday morning, Ethan arrived at Clarity Tech's headquarters dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt, looking more like the engineer he used to be than the waiter he'd become. Ava met him in the lobby and led him up to the executive floor, aware of her employees' curious glances. In the conference room, she spread out the technical documentation, Clarity Tech's architecture designs, Datacore's patent filing, development timelines, and the preliminary sketches they'd shown Marcus during his interview. Ethan studied everything in silence for nearly an hour, making occasional notes on a legal pad. Ava watched him work, seeing a side of him she'd only glimpsed before. The focused intensity, the methodical approach, the way his mind parsed complex information into comprehensible patterns. Finally, he looked up. They didn't just steal your general approach, he said. They copied specific implementation details. Look here. He pointed to a section of Datacore's filing. This optimization sequence is identical to yours, down to the order of operations. That's not convergent evolution. That's direct copying. But how do we prove Marcus gave it to them? Ava asked. You don't, Ethan said. You prove that no one could have developed this sequence independently without access to your specific documentation. The probability of arriving at this exact solution through independent research is statistically negligible. He walked her through his analysis, showing her the mathematical proof of how unlikely it was for two teams to develop identical solutions to a problem with thousands of possible approaches. This is brilliant, Ava breathed, but I'm going to need someone who can testify to this in court, someone with the credentials to be taken seriously. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I could do it. You? Ava blinked. Ethan, you'd have to disclose your background, your credentials. Are you willing to do that? If it helps you, yes, he said simply. What credentials exactly are we talking about? Ava pressed. Ethan sighed. I have a PhD in systems engineering from MIT. Worked on classified defense projects for 6 years, published 3 papers on integration architecture in peer-reviewed journals before I went into the private sector. I know my way around a technical patent dispute. Ava stared at him. You have a PhD from MIT? Had a whole different life, Ethan said with a slight smile. Told you I walked away from everything. Why didn't you mention this before? Because it's not who I am anymore, Ethan said. That guy was successful by conventional measures, sure, but he was also miserable, never home, missing everything that mattered. I don't miss him. Ava moved around the table and took his hands. But you'd be willing to bring him back for this? Not bring him back, Ethan corrected. Just borrow his credentials for a good cause. There's a difference. They spent the rest of the day working together, with Ethan building out the technical analysis and Ava coordinating with the legal team. By evening, they had a solid case demonstrating that Datacore's architecture was impossibly similar to Clarity Tech's to have been developed independently. As they were packing up to leave, David stuck his head in the conference room. "Ava, do you have a minute?" He glanced at Ethan. "Privately?" Ava followed him into her office, where David closed the door and turned to face her. "Who is that guy?" he asked. "I ran a basic background check after you brought him into confidential strategy sessions." "Ava, he's Dr. Ethan Cole. He designed the secure communication backbone that half the military uses. He's considered one of the top systems architects in the country." "I know," Ava said calmly. "You know." David's voice rose. "And you didn't think to mention that your boyfriend is basically a genius who could solve half our engineering problems?" "Because that's not why I'm with him," Ava said firmly. "And it's not why he's helping. He's doing this because Datacore is trying to destroy something I built, not because I'm recruiting him for his expertise." David studied her. "You're serious about him?" "Very serious," Ava confirmed. "Good," David said, surprising her. "Because in the 6 years I've worked with you, I've never seen you this balanced, this happy. Whatever he's doing, it's working." The patent dispute with Datacore took 3 months to resolve. Ethan's analysis proved decisive. His credentials and clear demonstration of the statistical impossibility of independent development forced Datacore to settle. They withdrew their patent application, paid substantial damages, and signed an agreement not to use the disputed architecture. More importantly for Ava, they had to publicly acknowledge that Marcus Hendricks had provided them with proprietary information he'd obtained through misrepresentation. Marcus's reputation in the industry was destroyed overnight. The victory should have felt sweeter than it did. Clarity Tech was secure, their technology was protected, and they'd emerged stronger from the challenge. But as Ava sat in the conference room after the settlement was announced, surrounded by her celebrating team, all she could think about was getting back to Ethan and Sophie. She left early, drove to Ethan's apartment, and found them making dinner together. Sophie was standing on a stool at the counter, carefully measuring flour while Ethan supervised. "We're making homemade pasta," Sophie announced proudly. "From scratch. It's very complicated." "It looks amazing," Ava said, kissing the top of Sophie's head and then Ethan's cheek. "We won the case. Datacore settled." "That's great," Ethan said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "Congratulations." "Couldn't have done it without your analysis," Ava said. "Sure you could have," Ethan said. "Would have just taken longer." They ate dinner together at the small dining table, Sophie chattering about her day at school, while Ava and Ethan exchanged glances over her head. After Sophie went to bed, they settled onto the couch with glasses of wine. "I've been thinking," Ava said carefully, "about the future." "Yeah?" Ethan said. "Clarity Tech is stable now. Better than stable, actually, and I've realized that I don't want to spend the rest of my life just fighting to maintain market share." She turned to face him. "I want to build something that matters, something that makes a real difference." "Like what?" Ethan asked. "Like educational platforms for kids like Sophie," Ava said. "Technology that actually improves lives instead of just optimizing corporate efficiency. I've been sketching out ideas, and I keep coming back to the same thing. What if we created tools that helped close the opportunity gap? That gave kids from any background access to quality learning resources?" Ethan's expression grew thoughtful. "That's ambitious." "I know," Ava said, "and I can't do it alone. I'd need partners who understand both the technical side and the human side. People who've seen firsthand what happens when potential goes undeveloped because someone didn't have access to the right resources." "Are you asking me to join you?" Ethan said slowly. "I'm asking you to consider it," Ava said. "Not to be my employee or my consultant, as an equal partner. Someone who helps shape the vision from the ground up." "Ava, I haven't worked in tech in years. My skills are probably outdated." "Your skills are fine," Ava interrupted. "And more than that, you have perspective I don't. You've made hard choices about what matters. You've raised a child as a single parent while working multiple jobs. You understand what real barriers look like, what real needs are. That's worth more than any technical credential." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "What about the restaurant?" "What about it?" Ava asked. "I like the work. I like the people. It's flexible. It lets me be there for Sophie." "This would too," Ava said. "We'd build it to work around life, not the other way around. Flexible hours, remote work when needed, Sophie always comes first. That would be foundational, not negotiable. You've really thought about this, Ethan said. Yeah, Ava admitted, because I can't imagine building something this important without you. Ethan pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence for a while. Can I think about it? He finally asked. Of course, Ava said. Take all the time you need. But the next morning, Ethan woke her with coffee and a smile. I'm in, he said. On one condition. Name it, Ava said. Sophie gets to be our first tester. Every feature, every tool, every design, if it doesn't work for her, we rework it until it does. Ava grinned. Deal. They shook hands solemnly, then Ethan pulled her into a kiss that made her forget about coffee entirely. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of planning and development. Ava gradually transitioned her role at Clarity Tech, moving from CEO to chairwoman and bringing in an external candidate to take over day-to-day operations. It was harder than she'd expected to let go, but also freeing in ways she hadn't anticipated. She and Ethan worked from her house most days, designing the framework for what they were calling Bridge Learn, an educational platform that combined adaptive learning algorithms with hands-on project guides. Sophie was indeed their primary tester, providing brutally honest feedback on what worked and what was boring. This math game is okay, she'd say, but it needs more dinosaurs. Everything's better with dinosaurs. So they added dinosaurs and unicorns and whatever else Sophie suggested, finding that her instincts were surprisingly good at identifying what would engage other kids her age. They brought in a small team, carefully selected people who shared their vision of technology as a tool for equity rather than just profit. Former teachers, educational researchers, developers who'd left big tech to find more meaningful work. The first version of Bridge Learn launched quietly, offered free to schools in underserved communities. The response was overwhelming. Teachers reported that students who'd been struggling for years were suddenly engaged, that the combination of adaptive software and hands-on projects was reaching kids that traditional methods had failed. Within 3 months, they had 50 schools using the platform. Within 6 months, 500. Ava found herself doing a different kind of work now, not board presentations and investor pitches, but classroom visits and teacher trainings. She watched kids light up when they finally grasped concepts that had seemed impossible before. She heard from parents whose children were excited about homework for the first time ever. And every night, she came home to Ethan and Sophie to dinner table conversations about their days and weekend plans and all the ordinary magic of a life built on something real. One evening, nearly a year after that disastrous blind date at Meridian, Ava was helping Sophie with a book report when her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something made her answer. Ms. Bennett, this is Karen Rodriguez from the National Education Foundation. I'm calling about Bridge Learn. Ava's pulse quickened. Yes? We've been reviewing educational technology platforms for our Innovation in Learning grant. I wanted to inform you that Bridge Learn has been selected as one of this year's recipients. The grant includes $5 million in funding and partnership opportunities with school districts across the country. Ava sat down hard on the couch, barely able to process what she was hearing. Thank you. Thank you so much. You've built something remarkable, Karen said warmly. We're excited to help you scale it. Expect our formal offer letter by the end of the week. When the call ended, Ava sat in stunned silence. Sophie looked up from her book. What's wrong? She asked. Nothing's wrong, Ava said, a huge smile spreading across her face. Everything is very, very right. Ethan emerged from the kitchen, took one look at her expression, and knew something significant had happened. We got the grant, Ava said. The National Education Foundation grant. $5 million. Ethan crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around. Sophie shrieked with laughter and demanded to be picked up too, so they ended up in a 3-way hug, all of them laughing and crying at once. We did it, Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. We actually did it. We're going to help so many kids, Ava said. Kids who might not otherwise get a chance. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Ava and Ethan sat on the back deck under the stars, processing what this meant. You know what's funny? Ava said. A year ago, I would have measured success by market valuation and stock price. I would have been chasing the biggest exit, the most impressive acquisition. And now? Ethan asked. Now I measure it by how many kids we reach, Ava said. How many lives we can actually change. And that feels so much better than anything I achieved before. You've changed, Ethan observed, in the best way. So have you, Ava countered. You're not hiding anymore, not pretending the brilliant engineer doesn't exist. I'm not hiding, Ethan agreed, but I'm also not that person anymore. I'm something better, someone who can use those skills in service of something that actually matters. They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined. I love you, Ava said. I know I say it all the time now, but I need you to know how much I mean it. You changed my entire life. We changed each other's lives, Ethan corrected gently. That's how the best partnerships work. And sitting there under the stars, with the sounds of the city distant and the warmth of Ethan's hand in hers, Ava felt something she'd spent her entire life chasing finally settle into place. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. The grant money transformed Bridge Learn from a promising startup into a genuine force for change. Within 6 months, they'd expanded to 1,200 schools across 32 states. Ava and Ethan hired a team of 15, moved into a real office space, and started fielding partnership requests from organizations they'd only dreamed of working with. But success brought its own complications. On a Tuesday morning in late spring, Ava sat in a video conference with representatives from the Chambers Foundation, one of the largest educational nonprofits in the country. They wanted to partner with Bridge Learn to reach an additional 5,000 schools, but their terms were aggressive. We'd need majority control of the platform development, the foundation's director said, her voice crisp through the speakers. Our brand reputation requires that we maintain oversight of all educational content. That's not how we work, Ava said carefully. Bridge Learn's strength comes from our agility, our ability to respond directly to teacher and student feedback. Adding a layer of oversight would slow that down considerably. Ms. Bennett, we're offering access to 5,000 schools and $20 million in funding. Surely some compromise on operational control is reasonable. Ava felt the old instinct kick in. The one that said, take the deal, maximize growth, worry about the details later. A year ago, she would have negotiated terms and signed within a week, but she'd learned to measure success differently now. Let me discuss this with my team, she said. We'll get back to you by Friday. After the call ended, Ethan leaned back in his chair and studied her. You're going to turn them down, he said. It wasn't a question. Am I that transparent? Ava asked. Only to someone who knows you. Ethan moved around the desk to stand beside her. Talk me through it. They want control, Ava said, which means committees and approval processes and bureaucracy. We'd reach more kids, but we'd lose the ability to innovate quickly, to really listen and adapt. So it's a trade-off, Ethan said. Scale versus responsiveness. Yeah, Ava rubbed her temples. A year ago, I would have taken scale every time. But now I keep thinking about what Sophie said last week when we were testing the new science module. That the volcano simulation was cool, but the instructions were too complicated, Ethan recalled. Exactly. We fixed that in 48 hours because we could move fast. If we have to run every change past a foundation committee, that 48 hours becomes 4 months. And in the meantime, how many kids get frustrated and give up? Ethan pulled her to her feet and wrapped his arms around her. You already know what you want to do. I do, Ava admitted. I just needed to say it out loud to make sure I wasn't being stubborn. You're not being stubborn, Ethan said. You're being true to why we built this in the first place. They turned down the Chambers Foundation on Thursday. The director was not pleased, but Ava slept better that night than she had in weeks. Friday evening, Ava picked Sophie up from school for their weekly tradition, ice cream and bookstore browsing. Sophie had started second grade in the fall and had developed strong opinions about everything from chapter books to which ice cream flavors were scientifically superior. Mint chocolate chip is objectively the best, Sophie declared as they walked through the shopping district. Chocolate is good. Mint is good. Together they're exponentially better. I don't think that's how exponential math works, Ava said, amused. It is for ice cream, Sophie said with the certainty of a 7-year-old. Daddy agrees with me. Your dad agrees with you about everything, Ava pointed out. Not everything, Sophie said. He said I couldn't get a puppy until I was older and more responsible. That seems fair. But I'm very responsible now, Sophie argued. I remember to brush my teeth almost every night. Almost every night is not quite the same as every night, Ava said gently. They reached the ice cream shop and ordered their usual mint chocolate chip for Sophie, salted caramel for Ava. As they sat at a small table by the window, Sophie swung her legs and studied Ava with an expression that was becoming increasingly familiar. It was the look she got when she was working up to asking something important. Can I ask you something? Sophie finally said. Always, Ava replied. Are you going to marry my dad? Ava nearly choked on her ice cream. That's a pretty big question. I know, Sophie said matter-of-factly. But you love him, right? And he loves you. And you're together all the time. That's what people do when they get married. It's a little more complicated than that, Ava said carefully. Why? Sophie asked. You're happy together. I'm happy when you're both around, Mrs. Chen says you're good for us. What's complicated? Out of the mouths of children, Ava thought. When you stripped away all the adult anxieties and overthinking, Sophie was right. It wasn't actually that complicated. You're right, Ava said. It's not complicated. I do love your dad, very much. So, you'll marry him? Sophie's eyes lit up. If he asks me, Ava said with a smile. He will, Sophie said confidently. He's just waiting for the right moment. He told Mrs. Chen he wanted it to be perfect. Ava's heart stuttered. He did? Sophie nodded, completely oblivious to the bombshell she'd just dropped. He has a ring and everything. I helped him pick it out. It's really pretty. It has a blue stone because he said your favorite color is blue. Ava sat back in her chair trying to process this information. Ethan had been planning to propose. Was planning to propose. And Sophie knew all about it. Sophie, Ava said gently, does your dad know you're telling me this? Sophie's eyes went wide. Oh no, this was supposed to be a surprise, wasn't it? Yeah, sweetie, it was. I'm really bad at keeping secrets, Sophie said miserably. Daddy's going to be so upset. Hey, it's okay, Ava said, reaching across to squeeze her hand. How about this? We don't tell him you told me, and when he does ask, I'll act completely surprised. Deal? Sophie brightened. Really? You can do that. I'm a pretty good actress when I need to be, Ava assured her. Your dad will never know. They finished their ice cream and headed to the bookstore, but Ava's mind was spinning. Ethan was going to propose. The thought filled her with a joy so intense it was almost frightening. After years of failed relationships and prioritizing work over everything else, she'd found someone who saw all of her. The driven CEO and the woman who helped 7-year-olds with science projects and loved both versions equally. That evening, back at Ethan's apartment, Ava watched him make dinner while Sophie did homework at the kitchen table. He moved with the same controlled precision he brought to everything, chopping vegetables with the focus of someone solving a complex equation. He looked up and caught her staring. What? He asked, smiling. Nothing, Ava said. Just thinking about how lucky I am. Pretty sure I'm the lucky one, Ethan countered. I got ditched at a restaurant and somehow ended up with you. I was the one who got ditched, Ava corrected. Semantics, Ethan said, crossing to kiss her forehead. Point is, we're both lucky. Sophie made a gagging sound from the table. You guys are so mushy. You love it, Ethan told his daughter. Maybe, Sophie admitted with a grin. The following week brought unexpected news from an old contact. Rachel, Ava's former assistant at Clarity Tech, called with an unusual request. I know this is out of nowhere, Rachel said, but I've been working with a nonprofit that provides technology training to formerly incarcerated individuals. They're struggling with their curriculum. It's outdated, not aligned with what employers actually want. I immediately thought of Bridge Learn. We focus on K-12 education, Ava said slowly. Adult learning is a different ballgame. I know, but your approach, the adaptive learning combined with hands-on projects, it could work for any age. These are people who've been told they're worthless, that they'll never amount to anything. What you're doing with kids, showing them their potential, adults need that too. Maybe even more. Ava felt something click into place. Send me the details. Let me talk to Ethan. That evening, she and Ethan sat on the back deck going through the information Rachel had sent. The nonprofit, Second Chance Skills, worked with about 300 people a year, but their job placement rate was only 40%. Most participants dropped out before completing the program. The problem is clear, Ethan said, scanning the curriculum outline. They're teaching obsolete skills using methods that assume participants have educational backgrounds they don't have. It's designed to fail. Could we adapt Bridge Learn for adults? Ava asked. Not just the technology, but the philosophy. Meeting people where they are, building confidence through achievement? Absolutely, Ethan said. Actually, this could be huge. If we can prove the model works across age groups, across different populations, we could help a lot more people than we initially imagined, Ava finished. They spent the next month developing an adult version of Bridge Learn, working directly with Second Chance Skills participants to understand their needs. Ava found herself sitting in prison visiting rooms and community centers, listening to stories of people who'd made mistakes and were trying to rebuild their lives. One man, Thomas, had served 6 years for a crime he committed at 19. Now in his late 20s, he was trying to learn coding but kept hitting walls. I never finished high school, he told Ava quietly. Most of these classes assume you know algebra, understand logic structures. I'm starting from way behind. What if we built something that didn't make those assumptions? Ava asked. That met you exactly where you are and built from there. Thomas's eyes filled with something Ava recognized. The same hope she'd seen in Sophie's face when a difficult concept finally clicked. That would change everything, he said. 3 months later, they piloted the adult program with 30 participants. The results were staggering, 90% completion rate, and within 6 months of finishing, 75% had found employment in their chosen field. Thomas was one of them. He called Ava the day he got hired at a small software company. I start Monday, he said, his voice shaking with emotion. I didn't think anyone would give me a chance. You gave yourself a chance, Ava said. You did the work? We just provided the tools. No, Thomas said firmly. You saw me as someone worth investing in. That's everything. After the call ended, Ava sat at her desk and cried. Not sad tears, but the kind that came from witnessing human potential unfold, from being part of something that genuinely mattered. Ethan found her there 20 minutes later and pulled her into his arms. Good cry or bad cry? He asked. The best cry, Ava said. Thomas got hired. He sounded so happy, Ethan, like his whole life just opened up. That's why we do this, Ethan said softly. That moment right there. They stood holding each other, and Ava thought about the journey that had brought them here. A disastrous blind date, a hospital emergency, butterscotch chip pancakes, and a shared vision of using technology to create genuine opportunity. It was so much better than anything she could have planned. Summer arrived with Seattle's brief but glorious sunshine. BridgeLearn was now in 2,000 schools and had expanded to 5 Second Chance Skills locations. Ava had officially sold her remaining shares in Clarity Tech, severing her last tie to her old life. On a Saturday in late June, Sophie's 8th birthday, they threw a party at Ava's house. The backyard was filled with kids running around in dinosaur costumes. Sophie had insisted on a paleontology theme, and parents chatting over drinks. Mrs. Chen cornered Ava by the refreshment table. You know he's going to ask you tonight, the older woman said with a knowing smile. Ava blinked. How did you... Sophie can't keep a secret to save her life, Mrs. Chen said fondly. Been talking about the ring for weeks. Ethan thinks he's being so clever, planning this big romantic moment after the party. Does everyone know except me? Ava asked, half laughing. Probably, Mrs. Chen said. But pretend to be surprised. He's been so nervous about getting it right. As the afternoon stretched into evening and parents collected their sugar-high children, Ava helped clean up while Ethan got Sophie ready for bed. When he came back downstairs, the house was quiet and the backyard was lit with string lights Ava had hung for the party. Walk with me? Ethan asked, offering his hand. They stepped out into the warm night air, and Ava felt her heart start to race despite knowing what was coming. I've been thinking about the night we met, Ethan said as they walked through the garden, about how close I came to just staying out of it, letting you leave that restaurant. I'm glad you didn't, Ava said softly. Me too. Ethan stopped and turned to face her. Because that night changed everything for me. I'd convinced myself that being a single dad was enough, that I'd had my chance at partnership and it didn't work out. But then this brilliant, driven woman walked into my life and showed me I'd been thinking about it all wrong. Ethan, Ava started, but he gently pressed a finger to her lips. Let me finish, he said, smiling. You showed me that real partnership isn't about choosing between the people you love and the work you care about. It's about finding someone who helps you build a life where both matter. Someone who makes you better at everything, at parenting, at work, at being human. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Even knowing it was coming, Ava felt tears spring to her eyes. Ava Bennett, Ethan said, dropping to one knee, you're my best friend, my business partner, and the love of my life. You're also Sophie's favorite person in the world, though she'd probably argue dinosaurs are tied for first place. Ava laughed through her tears. Will you marry me? Ethan opened the box to reveal a stunning sapphire ring, the blue stone catching the light from the string of bulbs overhead. Even though Sophie had spoiled the surprise weeks ago, even though Mrs. Chen had confirmed it that afternoon, the moment still took Ava's breath away. Because this wasn't about surprise, it was about choice. About choosing this man, this life, this beautiful, complicated family they'd built together. Yes, Ava said, pulling him to his feet. Yes, absolutely yes. Ethan slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her with an intensity that made the rest of the world disappear. When they finally broke apart, they heard cheering from Sophie's bedroom window. I told you she'd say yes, Sophie shouted down to them. Can I be a flower girl now? Were you supposed to be asleep? Ethan called up. It's my birthday. I'm too excited to sleep. Plus, I wanted to see if you'd actually do it. Ava burst out laughing. You want to come down and celebrate with us? Sophie appeared in the backyard 30 seconds later, still in her pajamas, and threw herself into their arms. We're going to be a real family now, she said happily, like officially. We've been a real family for a while now, Ethan said gently. This just makes it official. I know, Sophie said, but it's still really cool. They sat together on the back deck, Sophie between them, talking about wedding plans and what came next. Sophie had very specific ideas about the ceremony. Dinosaur decorations were apparently non-negotiable, and Ava found herself agreeing to everything because none of it actually mattered, except this feeling of rightness, of being exactly where she belonged. The wedding took place 3 months later at a small venue overlooking Puget Sound. They kept it intimate, 50 people, mostly family, close friends, and the Bridge Learn team. Sophie did serve as flower girl, wearing a dress she'd helped design that incorporated subtle dinosaur prints into the fabric. Mrs. Chen walked Ava down the aisle, having become as much a mother figure as a neighbor over the past 2 years. When Ava reached Ethan at the altar, he was crying unabashedly, not bothering to hide the emotion on his face. You look incredible, he whispered as she took his hands. So do you, she whispered back. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They'd written their own vows, and when Ethan spoke about finding courage in the most unexpected places, about learning that real strength meant choosing presence over prestige, Ava felt like he was narrating the story of her own transformation. When it was her turn, she looked at Sophie sitting in the front row, then back at Ethan. 2 years ago, I thought I knew what success looked like, she said. Corner office, impressive title, recognition from people who mattered. Then a waiter told me to stay at a restaurant when everything in me wanted to run, and that decision changed everything. She squeezed Ethan's hands. You taught me that success isn't about what you achieve. It's about who you become and who you choose to build a life with. You showed me that the most important work we can do is showing up for the people we love and using our gifts to create genuine opportunity for others. Her voice broke slightly. You and Sophie gave me a family. You gave me purpose. You gave me a life I didn't even know I was missing. And I promised to spend the rest of my days being worthy of that gift. There wasn't a dry eye in the venue. After they exchanged rings and sealed the ceremony with a kiss, Sophie rushed forward to wrap her arms around both of them. You're officially my mom now, she said to Ava, like legally and everything. Is that okay with you? Ava asked, even though they'd discussed this many times. It's the best, Sophie said simply. The reception was filled with laughter, dancing, and toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilarious. Rachel gave a speech about Ava's transformation from workaholic CEO to someone who actually remembered to eat lunch. David from Clarity Tech talked about the day Ethan had walked into their conference room and quietly revolutionized their entire legal strategy. But the toast that stuck with Ava came from Thomas, the formerly incarcerated man who'd been one of their first adult program participants. He stood up nervously, clearly uncomfortable with public speaking. "I don't know these people very well," he started, "but I know what they did for me. When I got out of prison, I thought my life was over before it really started. Every door was closed, every opportunity gone." His voice strengthened. "Then I met Ava and Ethan, and they didn't see my mistakes. They saw my potential. They built something that gave people like me a real second chance. Not charity, opportunity. The chance to prove we're more than the worst thing we ever did." He raised his glass. "So here's to Ava and Ethan. May your marriage be as transformative as the work you do. And may you never forget that the smallest acts of faith in people can change entire lives." The room erupted in applause, and Ava saw Ethan wipe his eyes. "That's why we do this," he said quietly, echoing the words he'd spoken months ago. "That right there." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Ava and Ethan stole a moment alone on the venue's balcony, overlooking the water. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I keep thinking about that night at Meridian," Ava said, leaning against Ethan's chest. "If Marcus hadn't walked out, if you hadn't told me to stay—" "But I did," Ethan said, "and you did. That's what matters." "Do you ever think about your old life?" Ava asked. "The career you walked away from?" "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. "But I don't miss it. That life was about proving I was smart enough, capable enough, worthy enough. This life, the one we're building together, it's about actually being those things in ways that matter." Ava turned to face him. "I love you." "I love you too," Ethan said. "Both versions of you, the CEO who can command a boardroom and the woman who makes dinosaur habitats with my daughter." "Our daughter," Ava corrected softly. "Our daughter," Ethan agreed, smiling. They stood together watching the sunset, and Ava thought about the journey that had brought them here. All the twists and turns, the crises and breakthroughs, the moments of doubt and the leaps of faith. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, successful by every conventional measure, but hollow in ways she hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Chasing achievements that never quite satisfied. Building a life that looked impressive from the outside but felt empty from within. That woman had walked into a restaurant expecting disappointment and found transformation instead. Not because she'd met a man who rescued her, but because she'd met a man who challenged her to reconsider what rescue even meant. Who showed her that real courage looked like walking away from everything the world said mattered to build something that actually did. 6 months after the wedding, Bridgelearn won the National Education Innovation Award. Ava and Ethan traveled to Washington to accept it together, and in her acceptance speech, Ava told the truth about where the idea had really started. "It began with a water filtration system made of coffee filters and gravel," she said, "built by a 7-year-old girl who wanted to solve real problems. She taught us that the best learning happens when you give people, any age, the tools and respect they need to discover their own capabilities." She looked at Ethan standing in the wings. "My partner and I built Bridgelearn on the principle that potential is universal, but opportunity is not. Our job isn't to judge who deserves a chance. It's to create pathways for everyone to prove what they're capable of when someone actually believes in them." The audience gave them a standing ovation, but what mattered most to Ava was Sophie's reaction when they FaceTimed her afterward. "You won the biggest award," Sophie squealed. "That's so cool. Can I bring the trophy to school for show and tell?" "It's not a trophy, sweetie," Ethan explained. "It's a plaque." "Even better," Sophie declared. "Plaques are more professional." They returned home to Seattle and to the work they loved. Bridgelearn continued to grow, but they kept it manageable, never sacrificing quality or mission for scale. They turned down acquisition offers from major education companies who wanted to buy them out. They stayed small enough to remain true to their values, large enough to make a real difference. And on a rainy November evening, almost exactly 2 years after that fateful night at Meridian, Ethan made a reservation at the same restaurant where they'd first met. "Why are we going back there?" Ava asked as they got ready. "Nostalgia," Ethan said with a mysterious smile. "Plus they have great carbonara." "We can get carbonara anywhere," Ava pointed out. "Humor me," Ethan said. They arrived at Meridian to find it virtually unchanged. The same elegant decor, the same quiet sophistication. But when they checked in, the hostess smiled warmly. "Mr. Cole, your table is ready, the same one as requested." She led them to the exact spot where Ava had sat alone 2 years ago, waiting for a date who never deserved her. As they settled into their seats, Ava looked at Ethan with wonder. "You remembered which table?" "I remember everything about that night," Ethan said. "I remember thinking you deserved so much better than what you were getting. I remember deciding to break protocol, because sometimes the rules matter less than doing what's right." A waiter approached their table, not the same one from that night, but carrying a similar presence of calm competence. "Good evening," he said. "Can I start you with something to drink?" "Actually," Ethan said, "we already know what we want, the 2015 Bordeaux and the tasting menu." The same order Marcus had placed without asking Ava's opinion. But when the wine arrived, Ethan raised his glass to her. "To second chances," he said, "to unexpected detours that lead exactly where we need to go, and to the courage to stay when everything says run." Ava clinked her glass against his, her eyes suspiciously bright. "To choosing presence over prestige," she added, "and to the man who taught me what real strength looks like." They drank, and then Ava reached across the table for his hand. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me, for staying, for building this beautiful life with me." "Thank you for taking the chance," Ethan replied, "for trusting that a waiter might know what he was talking about." They laughed, and Ava looked around the restaurant, at the other diners, the bustling servers, the elegant atmosphere that had once been the backdrop to her humiliation. Now it was just a restaurant, a place where good food was served and people gathered. The power it had held over her that night had dissolved completely because she'd found something infinitely more valuable than dignity salvaged from a bad date. She'd found partnership, purpose, a family built not on obligation, but on choice. As they lingered over dessert, the same tiramisu that had been on the table the night Marcus abandoned her, Ava thought about all the versions of success she'd chased over the years, the promotions and acquisitions, the board seats and industry recognition. None of it compared to this. Sitting across from her husband, knowing their daughter was home safe with Mrs. Chen, knowing that tomorrow they'd go into work and help more people discover their own potential, this was the success that actually mattered. When they finally left Meridian that night, walking hand in hand into the Seattle rain, Ava paused on the sidewalk and looked back at the restaurant. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked. "That I'm glad he left," Ava said. "Marcus, I'm glad he walked out and stuck me with the bill, because if he hadn't, I might never have really seen you, might never have stopped long enough to recognize what was right in front of me." "Everything happens for a reason?" Ethan said, a hint of irony in his voice. "No," Ava said, "but sometimes we're lucky enough to turn our disasters into opportunities. If we're brave enough to stay when the easier choice is to run." Ethan pulled her close and kissed her in the rain, and Ava felt the same certainty she'd felt the night they'd rushed Sophie to the hospital, the morning they'd made butterscotch chip pancakes, the moment he'd asked her to marry him. This was right. This was real. This was the life she was meant to live, not the one she'd planned, not the one she'd worked so hard to build, but the one that had found her when she was brave enough to stay at a restaurant when a waiter told her to wait. The one that had taught her the most important lesson of all, that success wasn't about what you achieved or accumulated, but about who you became and who you chose to build a life with. And as they walked to their car, the rain soaking their clothes but neither of them caring, Ava knew with absolute certainty that she'd found both. She'd found herself, and she'd found home.